Hey everybody, welcome to your horoscopes for the week. These are the horoscopes for the week ending October 22nd. Almost done with October already. That's kind of a little bit crazy. Things are calming down a little bit. There is some little bit of stuff there going on, but things are definitely calming down and not quite as crazy as they were. Obviously, the retrograde is over. So we don't have to deal with that anymore. That's good. Planet lineup is not quite as bad as it has been. It's going to get there again, though. So let's just enjoy the calm while we have it, I guess. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to get started. And of course, we're going to get started with Aries, as we always do. We still have Jupiter in retrograde. Actually, Jupiter in retrograde's almost leaving Aries, actually. 1 degree this week, moving like as it's moving back into Pisces, basically. Of course, once it goes direct, it will move back into Aries again. There went the cat. So anyways, we still have an opposition with Mercury. Mercury is direct, but it is still in Libra. And of course, at the very beginning of the week, we can add a square with the moon as well. So that kind of turns it into a little bit of a T-square. So it's a bit of a challenge as we first start off the week here. But the challenge gradually gets a little bit better, at least until the end of the week when the moon moves into opposition with Jupiter. So a little bit of a difficulty there. Focus is on how you think about things. And with Mercury's opposition and focus on long-term goals, how you approach your long-term goals in terms of the mindset that you approach your long-term goals in is really what it's all about this week. If you approach your goals with an attitude of I'm not going to be able to do this, or this seems like too much work, you're never going to do it. I mean, it's just that simple. We actually motivate ourselves by our mindsets. And if you ask any successful person out there, they're going to tell you when asked, were you ever afraid that you weren't going to be able to be successful? They would say no. They just never really entertained that idea. One of my favorite people in our more recent history was Lord Mountbatten, actually. And he was, if he wanted it, he went and got it. He did not ever entertain the idea that he wasn't worthy of it, that he couldn't accomplish it, even though he made these huge mistakes in his career that were literally like historically catastrophic to his particular country. It didn't matter. It's like that didn't even slow him down. He just kept on going. And when he was asked that question, were you ever afraid that you weren't going to be successful? His reply was no, never. When you're afraid, you don't do anything. So he just basically kept on going and lived his life in the way that he lived his life and in the mindset that he lived it in. A lot of people call him egotistical. You could say that. But I prefer to call it extremely self-aware, as well as extremely I can't even really think of the word here, but self-confident actually is the word that I'm looking for. So this is really what it's all about. When you bring the moon into it, both right at the beginning of the week as well as at the end of the week as well, this has a little bit of an emotional element to this. And there's a couple of things that come out of that actually for me. One, in terms of the end of the week, I feel like it's more, the emotion is more towards your long-term goals, not whether or not you think you're going to be able to achieve these goals. That's not what we're talking about here. But it's really creating a goal that means something to you. It feels right. This is, you can feel the pull in that direction. When you create goals like this, you stand a better chance of actually succeeding in those goals because now you have an emotional attachment to the goal. And anytime you have an emotional attachment to something, you tend to work a little bit harder toward the goal. So it makes it a lot easier than just, well, my goal is to hit up every in and out in California. And unless you're super excited about seeing every single one, chances are you're really not going to put a lot of effort into it. So that is what I have for you guys this week. It's not about not setting goals. It's not about not achieving goals. It's all about how you approach the goals. Make sure that you're approaching it in the right mindset. The right mindset being, yes, I can achieve these goals. Yes, there's going to be things that kind of sort of come in and challenge me, but I'm ready for the challenge. The more you're ready for the challenge, the more likely you are to succeed in those goals. So you guys, good luck with that. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Taurus. We continue to have Uranus in retrograde in Taurus this week. And of course, the retrograde is going to continue throughout the week as well. Uranus is still squared with Saturn. That's pretty much going to be there throughout the end of the year, or at least, up until the very end of the year, beginning of next year. Uranus's focus is on those you love. Saturn's focus is on the past. And so this sort of little bit of a challenge may create a little bit of difficulty, we'll just say. Difficulties that you can identify as difficulties that you've gone through in the past. So in many cases, these are your closest relationships, your children, your spouses, your parents, your siblings, those really inner circle relationships. And we often find ourselves getting into situations that are challenging, that we've been through before. A lot of times it's not something that happens often, as in every single day. So it's not necessarily a pattern that you're looking at as something that needs to be taken care of right now. But if it is, these challenges are coming up for a reason, and it's actually coming up to help you choose a different way of dealing with the situation. When you choose a different way of approaching the situation, whether it be communicating in the situation, whether it be your adjusting your attitude, we all need that sometimes, and it's better if we adjust it ourselves than somebody else adjusts it for us. When you choose a different way to approach the situation, you stand a better chance of getting a different result in the conversation. So a good example of that is, I have been married for 27 years now, and we have a very good communication system, the two of us. However, we oftentimes will have those conversations that are usually triggered by something that always triggers that conversation, where we converse in the same way. And it's usually a very stubborn, we each want the other one to see our point and don't really care about the other person's point. That is a course of communication that's not going to go anywhere. It just goes around in circles like we're two dogs chasing our tails. And for what? For no reason, really. It gets old after a while. Now, if I look at how I handle the trigger, it gives me an opportunity to be able to see where maybe if I jump in there in an angry tone, it's triggering him to do the same. So if I adjust my attitude and maybe choose different words to approach the system, then I actually have a chance of being able to have a different type of conversation. Now we're not stubbornly arguing with each other anymore. We're a little bit more open to seeing the other person's point of view. And a lot of times when this happens, I hear this over and over again with my clientele. It's like, well, if he would just do it, if he would just stop doing this, or she would just stop doing that. Okay, I get it. I mean, in that same situation with my husband, I do get it. I really do. However, we have no control over the other person. I have no control over my husband's reaction. Zero control. That's all in his control. The only control I have is to manage the situation in a different way that might help him also choose a different way of having the conversation. That way, we might actually be able to get something done, to actually have a conversation that provides a solution rather than this constant bickering back and forth. When you're stuck on, if only this person would do this, you're actually handing the control over to somebody else. And if you're a control freak like me, why the heck would you do that? Why would you hand the control over to somebody else? Most fixed signs are control freaks. So that really doesn't make any sense for Taurus, right? It also is a great big giant waste of energy when you keep having the same fight over and over and over again. And if it is coming up a lot, it is coming up a lot for a reason. It's constantly showing itself to you. This is a problem, it needs to be fixed. This is a problem, it needs to be fixed. So rather than continuing the cycle this week with this challenge coming up, take the opportunity to approach the situation in a different way, to manage your trigger rather than allowing your trigger to go ahead and speak for you. That's never a good idea. And usually 9 times out of 10, it's something that just flat out is going to cause a problem. And why cause more of a problem than you already have? So that's what I have for you guys this week. And I know you can handle it because you're tough bulls. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Gemini. We still have Mars in Gemini, and we have a beautiful grand trine with Mars in Gemini as Mars lines up with Saturn and Mercury in Libra, and of course, Saturn is in Aquarius. A grand trine is when you have at least one planet in all three signs of one single element. So in this case, we are looking at an air grand trine. Air signs are brilliant. I just love conversing with other air signs. Of course, I'm an air sign myself, so that helps. We crave intellect and we crave, anything that gets your brain working, kind of a thing, or a conversation that just gets your brain going and helps, you showcase everything that you've learned, or gives you an opportunity to learn something new, which is also something that air signs crave. Knowledge, all the time, knowledge. When you're talking about a grand trine, grand trines are interesting because these are planets coming together. So this isn't a challenge. This is actually planets coming together in a helpful way so that they're actually helping each other towards a common goal. And for Gemini, your focus is very much on your day-to-day schedule. And a day-to-day schedule is not necessarily the easiest thing for a Gemini. Geminis kind of like to go with the flow and roll with whatever is going on in the moment. And to be stuck to a rigid schedule is just not necessarily a place where Geminis are comfortable. However, it's your schedule. And you have to be reminded that it's because it's your schedule, you get to create whatever you want and put whatever you want in that schedule. For me personally, being an Aquarius, which is kind of like being a Gemini, but not completely, I resonate with this because my schedule has to have a lot of open time to move. I don't like things so strict that they can't move. And the reason for that is that that's how my life is. It's not a strict schedule. No matter what I do, I couldn't make it a strict schedule even if I wanted to. And the truth is that that's not how energetically I work. I have to be able to have room to kind of sort of move from one thing to another without having to be stuck only focusing my time on one thing, kind of a thing. It just helps me to keep my brain fresh and so that I don't get necessarily too bored with what it is that I'm focused on. Geminis are like that times 20, and so you can't stay focused on one thing all day. Mars being a part of this is also very interesting because Mars has a lot of energy and it's all about putting all that energy into something amazing when you think about it. So you've got this sort of all of these elements coming together that are really just pushing you in this specific direction. The issue with all of this is Mars is moving into a square, or I should say has moved into a square with Jupiter and Neptune. And at the end of the week, the moon is going to move into opposition with those two, creating a T-square, which is a really big challenge. Now, when you have the moon in a challenge like this, things can get a little bit emotional. And of course, we're talking about an air sign here. Air signs don't care for getting emotional in any way, shape, or form. So this is definitely going to create a giant difficulty. The moon's focus is on long-term goals. Jupiter and Neptune's focus is very much on how you think about things. No, we're talking about Gemini and we're talking about how you think. So of course, we're talking about thinking on a scale that nobody can understand but a Gemini. It is just overthinking like crazy. And the moon bringing that element in may bring some emotional thinking into that. I am more concerned about what I call stinking thinking. And stinking thinking really is that constant degrading yourself with your own brain coming in and saying, you can't do that. That's too much work, or you're never going to be able to accomplish that, or you're never going to be able to focus long enough to be able to actually get through that. And I actually know a Gemini who I would say does that and gets really excited about a project. And then he gets about, maybe a quarter of the way, halfway through, and just, it's like his brain the whole time is saying, you're never going to finish this project, because that's what he's known for, is not finishing projects. And so therefore the project never gets finished. And it's usually sitting somewhere at my house, by the way. This whole setup here is happening specifically to kind of help you identify where that's taking place and where that's happening, and maybe eliminate it. Just because your brain is telling you can't do it doesn't mean that you can't tell your brain to shut up and do it anyways. This is one of the big things in the world right now, I think, that we all have such a hard time with, is that everybody comes to me and says, well, that's just how my brain works, there's no way to change it. Why give that power away to your brain? The brain belongs to you, not the other way around. So that is absolutely not true. Just because your brain works that way does not mean that you can't retrain it to work the way it is more beneficial to you and your goals. So don't look at your goals as being so far off that you're never going to be able to achieve them. Instead, turn that around and say, okay, this is what I need to do to achieve these goals. This is what I'm going to do. And it doesn't have to be done overnight. It can take as long as it needs to take, as long as eventually you get there. And that is the beauty of it. Why we have to do everything so quickly, I don't know. But then again, we're talking about Geminis. Gemini's just, instant gratification. I get it, being an Aquarius too. So that is what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Cancer, no planets in Cancer this week, which is, well, it is what it is. We do have Pallas Athene in Cancer this week. Now, Pallas Athene is not a planet necessarily. I mean, it is a planet. It's a dwarf planet. It's more of a minor influence than the major planets, but it still has a pretty good influence, especially when it is the only influence. Although we also have the dark moon in your sign as well, the Lilith. Not quite in conjunction with each other, but pretty darn close, I would say. Focuses on relationships for you guys this week. And Pallas Athene is named after a warrior queen. And when you're talking about a warrior queen, you're talking about a woman's influence, okay, a female influence, who knows her worth, who knows how important she is, who knows how powerful she is, and she will stop at nothing to get what she wants. Now, when we first hear those words, we think, oh, okay, one of those women that just pushes through and takes whatever she wants. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a fearless woman who's not running around taking things because she can, but because she is so fierce in her protection of the things that she loves, her family, her friends, her household, and she will fight to the death if needs be to keep those things. We're talking about a time here where people would come and just take whatever they wanted from you. And if there was a woman by herself sitting there, well, that's an easy take right there. We overtake the woman, unless it's Pallas Athene, in which case you may have to work a little harder, or you may not be able to take that at all. It just really depends, I guess, on her mood at the time. The Lilith also is named after a woman. And the Lilith, the story behind the Lilith is that she was a Puritan woman, that she had to follow very strict rules of the time, no sex before marriage. And when you did get married, it was in the missionary position. It was not to be enjoyed. It was to be, to make children, things like this. They had such very strict and stringent rules to the point where you wore clothes all the way up to here and all the way down so that you didn't even see your feet. God forbid your ankles showed, right? She did not like this strict and very rigid way of living, and she literally ran away, ran off into the woods, tore those restrictive clothes off, danced naked with all the other witches in the coven, and lived happily ever after, completely shunned by everybody that she had known her whole entire life. The Lilith really is all about where you go through drastic changes, especially if these changes are so strict they make you uncomfortable. And Pallas Athene really is all about where you tend to fight for what you want. And when we're talking about focus on relationships, this is actually a really interesting combination here, because on one hand, you're looking at changing things that don't necessarily resonate with you anymore. But you're also talking about fighting for things that belong to you, that it feels like somebody is trying to take away. It seems like an oxymoron, and it almost seems like they kind of don't go together a little bit, but actually they go together brilliantly, because we're all put in these situations where there are times where we have to fight the fight for those that we love, or we have to fight the fight for ourselves. Now, most cancers that I know are not big on fighting that fight, honestly. I'm not saying that cancers don't fight. I have seen cancers fight. They do. It's not that they don't fight, but they tend to avoid the fight as much as possible unless it is absolutely necessary. And while I'm not saying that this week it's absolutely necessary, I am saying that when it comes to a relationship that really means something to you, it is worth the fight. It is always worth the fight. Now, of course, if we're talking about a relationship, well, all you do is fight. That's not necessarily good. And that's where the warrior queen comes in. It is not necessarily to fight the battle until you win. Actually, we want to reprogram our thinking about fighting. It's not about winning. It's about coming to a mutual understanding. And coming to a mutual understanding takes a bit of compromise on both sides. And if you don't have compromise on both sides, it's not a relationship, period. So this week, when these particular things come up, and we're not just talking about fighting each other, we're talking about fighting for each other. We all come into those points where somebody that you love is threatened and you have to stand up and defend them in some way, shape, or form. These are the things that we're looking at to possibly come up for you guys this week. However, it's not, I don't take this as a bad thing, actually. To be honest with you, I think that there are times where we just need to get up and fight, whether it is fighting a battle against another person, whether it's fighting a battle against an organization or institution, or, I mean, even in some cases, we're getting up and fighting battles against our government, for things that just don't make any sense. We all go through these types of battles almost every single day. Sometimes we don't even realize that we're going through these battles. This week really is all about coming into your own. And instead of feeling like the world is against you, it's standing up and saying, the world is not against me. I won't let the world be against me. I'm going to fight for what I want and what I believe in, because I know that that's the best course of action for me. So you guys be brave and powerful and have a good week with that. And we're going to move on to Leo. We're focused on finances and money this week with not a whole lot of planet influence going on, except, of course, for that moon that moves into your sign about Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday-ish. And of course, when that moon moves into your sign, it moves into opposition with Saturn and squared with Uranus, creating a bit of a T-square. The moon is emotional, and when the moon comes into your sign, your emotions can be high. We'll just put it that way. When it lines up in a challenge with other planets, that sort of gives you a reason for your emotions to, to be on high, if that makes sense also. We're talking about Saturn being focused on the past and Uranus being focused on those you love. When you are focused on finances, and the eighth house, it doesn't just rule finances, it rules personal growth as well. The eighth house is all about renewal. It's all about the things that you can change from here on out, which is opposite the second house, the house of the past, the house of childhood, which is a house that rules things that you have no power to change. When you look at how these planets are lining up, it feels like there's a lot of old triggers coming up around these things in the past that you can't change. But what you can change is your reaction to the trigger. And that's really the only control that you have in this particular situation. Now, I think we all go through this type of thing to a certain extent. I mean, in terms of trauma, everybody has different levels of trauma. I'm not necessarily one to compare levels of trauma because you usually can't compare. And it's also really not right to compare either when you think about it. Just because somebody else's level of trauma seems like it's less than yours doesn't mean that it didn't affect them in the same way that it affected you, or as deeply as it affected you. When we're talking about managing triggers, this can be tricky. And in this day and age, I'd say over the last 10 years or so, the word trigger has come up, and I've heard a lot of people saying to other people, don't say those words to me. It triggers me. Or don't do that. It triggers me. It's not for the other person to stop triggering you unless they're doing it on purpose. That's a completely different story. Of course, you have to know that they're doing it on purpose in order to accuse them of doing it on purpose. But that's not really what we're talking about here. We're going to get triggered all over the place. I get triggered almost every single day. So what happens when you get triggered? Normally, you have this emotional reaction. And either you have the emotional reaction at the person that's triggering you, or you have an emotional reaction that you lock inside and it eats you up forever. Managing your triggers instead helps you to avoid all of that. First of all, it literally takes seconds because that's really all you have. When you get triggered, you got to stop yourself. You got to say, okay, I'm getting triggered over something that happened a long time ago, and this situation is not the same thing. So you have to separate it. First of all, you separate what happened in the past from what's going on right now. If it is not identical, even if it feels the same, you want to try and separate that completely. Take the emotion out of it. For instance, I was actually just talking to a client about being triggered at work with something that felt like something that happened when she was a child. And this is actually a very common thing. Now, in that particular instance, the best course of action would be to separate those two things, leave the family thing, the family stuff over here, because it doesn't necessarily apply to what's going on with the work situation. And while the work situation feels the exact same way as the family thing did, that's fine. It's a work situation. It's not a family thing. So we want to separate that. This is not an abandonment thing now. This is an issue, a frustrating, stupid issue that we're having at work here. And then you look at it in that way, it puts it into a different perspective, allowing you to control how you react to it. If you allow the trigger to react, you're going to react in an emotional, in an angry, in a way that is not professional. When you're dealing with a work situation, you want to keep it as professional as possible for as long as you can, anyways. Of course, depending on that situation. This is something that's happening when the moon comes in, so it's not going to be going on all week. Literally, we're looking at Wednesday. You might have a bit of a challenge there, and then the moon moves on and things actually calm down a little bit. In terms of money and in terms of finances, this is a very good week actually for you guys to, sort of take a gander at your financial goals just to make sure that you're on the right track, or maybe set some financial goals if you haven't done that yet, or even take a look at certain things that you need to do and get accomplished in order to set some of those financial goals. So you take some time to do that this week. You probably thank me for it later, to be honest with you. So that is what I have for you guys this week. And we're going to move on to Virgo. Things are pretty quiet in Virgo since Mercury left, which is nice. Of course, right at the end of the week, the moon is going to come into your sign, and that is going to take that quiet and just shake it all up and make it nice and loud for you. And of course, when it's the moon, it's always an emotional thing, which is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world for Virgos. Not to say that Virgos don't get emotional, because they do. But they tend to prefer to approach things in a logical way, because that is what makes sense to them. I always associate Virgos with numbers because they're easy. Numbers don't lie, is the term that I hear around Virgos. So the moon does not fit into that sort of strict and stringent numbers game at all. Numbers aren't emotional. The moon is emotional. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Virgo or you're an Aquarius or you're a Pisces, everybody is going to have an emotional experience at some point in their lives, because that is why we're here. It's to have these emotional experiences. Focus is on long-term goals this week. And I feel like this is a perfect place for Virgos, actually. Of all the signs in the zodiac, Virgos are definitely at the top of the list for actually sitting down and creating long-term goals and sticking to those long-term goals. I think Capricorn is really the only sign that can even come close to being as good as they are, I guess, at this particular thing. However, you get the moon in there lining up in an opposition with Jupiter and Neptune, as well as a square with Mars. And we have a challenge, a T-square challenge. The moon in opposition with Neptune and Pluto, both planets being retrograde also. So Pluto's retrograde. Pluto's all about growth and expansion. When you retrograde that, it sort of feels like nothing. You're not moving forward in anything. Of course, this is going to create frustration, which is going to create an emotional response, right? Both of these planets are focused on how you think. And it's really important at this time, actually, to pay attention to what kind of emotional BS is going on in your brain at that time. This is actually information that you really need to know, because most of the time that stuff creeps in there and just goes on forever. We're not even paying attention. It's just doing it, and we're just allowing it to do it because we're not paying attention to what's going on there. And Mars's focus is on your day-to-day schedule. And so I see that playing out as frustrations and changes happening in your schedule, which is that Mars influence is going to heighten that frustration for sure. Now, in terms of a strict schedule, Virgos like to keep a very strict schedule, not necessarily that they don't like it to change, but it is comforting to Virgos to know exactly what they're doing every single day. And so when you have wrenches thrown into an already busy schedule, it creates chaos, and it's definitely going to create an emotional response. How you think about these things actually rules whether you have an emotional response or not. Me personally, a lot of times when, say, I have a cancellation in my schedule, I can look at that as I'm out money and I'm, this and that, I could be doing blah blah blah, whatever. That's going to create a negative response. If I look at it as, whoo, a free hour that I didn't count this morning, it feels a lot lighter. Now I'm like, I have a whole hour, and what do I do with it? I could do anything with it, right? It just changes the energy. One is frustrating, the other isn't. It's exciting, and oh my gosh, what am I going to do with an extra hour? So you look at it in those terms, it actually does make a huge difference. Now, if we're adding something to an already busy schedule, that is a little bit more difficult, because at first you're going to you're going to panic and go, I don't know what I'm going to do, right? And that's going to create an emotional response. Or you can look at it in terms of, okay, well, you know what? This thing came in because I needed to do it. I'm sure it's really important. Let me see what I can do to reschedule, shuffle a few things around, and see if I can fit this in. Either way, again, your mindset and how your mindset approaches the situation helps you to basically, don't know what I'm saying. It really helps to put the right energy into what you're doing. Therefore, you're managing your frustration. You're managing any kind of triggers that come out of that frustration. You're managing your own emotional health in that situation. And no, you can't do that every single day, of course. But if you do it more often than you allow the emotion to take over, it changes the energy all around into what you're doing. And it makes you a happier person, to be honest with you. That really does work. So that is what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Libra. This is the very last week that the Sun and Venus are in Libra. In fact, we are ending the week with the Sun and Venus at 29 degrees Libra, which means the very next day, they boop right on into Scorpio, and Libra season is over. So party on, guys. Make it a big party, because this is your last week. We also have Mercury in Libra as well. All focus is on career goals, specifically long-term career goals. And Mercury is in a beautiful grand trine with Saturn, which is focused on the past, as well as Mars, which is focused on your day-to-day duties. All those things line up pretty well, except for the past. That's kind of weird, huh? How does the past influence your long-term goals for your career in the future? Well, it does. It actually has a wonderful influence when you think about it. When you look back on the past, on how you have achieved your career goals in the past, you go back to what works, you can see what didn't work, so you can change that up and avoid doing the same thing you did before that didn't work. The past really has a lot of very valuable lessons in there if you choose to look at them in that way, of course. And if you do, that it's very beneficial, to be honest. A lot of times, when we don't do that, we tend to continue to keep repeating the same pattern over and over again. And if you want to move forward in your career and be successful in your career, you definitely want to look back at what has happened in the past with those goals to avoid those things that kind of tripped you up before as much as possible. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to find new things to trip you up. I mean, that's just how life works, right? And that's fine. You just don't want to keep getting tripped up by the same old thing over and over again. That gets a little bit annoying and frustrating after a while. So you do want to be aware of that. Also, the sun and Venus are in perfect conjunction with each other. We're talking in the same place, and it's not really in the same place. But if we're talking about our viewpoint, Venus would be right in front of the sun. So it looks like to us that they're literally in the exact same place. And Venus and the sun are actually in a beautiful trine with Jupiter right now. Now, Jupiter is retrograde. And Jupiter is all about growth and expansion. So retrograde, it kind of seems like there is no growth and expansion going on. But that's really, we're not talking about whether we are growing or not growing. There's always growth happening. It's the speed of the growth that we're talking about. And slowing down that growth is not a bad thing, actually. When you speed through something, you wind up missing things, right? Because you're not paying attention, you're going too fast. Slowing down your growth actually does work in your favor because you can make sure you've ticked off every box, you've taken care of everything that you need to take care of, and you can move forward knowing that everything is taken care of. If you speed through too fast, you miss a couple things, you got to backtrack. Good, it's just a waste of time, right? That's really what it comes down to. It's just a waste of time. With Jupiter's focus on how you think about things, this retrograde also is very helpful as well. It'll manage some of that stinking thinking for you. And we all have that self-destructive thinking that really gets in the way in terms of whether or not we're successful or not. So this Jupiter retrograde actually is sort of helping to slow that down a little bit and giving you an opportunity to really pay attention to it and to see where that might be tripping you up, because that is also very important information. As you manage how you think about the situation, and of course, how you manage how you're going to approach the situation from here on out, using the past as an example, it gives you a lot of tools to be able to not just set the goals, but to communicate your needs within those goals in a way that is that makes sense, that is open to you actually receiving what you want. If you have a tendency to be a passive aggressive communicator, that's not necessarily something that breeds success. People can really misunderstand what you're saying. They can completely ignore what you're saying. There's a lot of things that are taking place inside that communication that just don't work really well. Approaching it with a direct communication, this is what I want, this is what I'm willing to do to get it, let's negotiate, that actually is a lot more helpful in terms of you being able to get what it is that you want. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Good luck with that. And we're going to move on to Scorpio. We have 1 week this week. This is it. This is your last week before there are, well, to enjoy, there are no planets in your sign, which is actually a good thing, can be a not so good thing. It really just depends. We are going to end the week, of course, with the Sun and Venus in conjunction right on the cusp of your sign. Actually, the end of the week is the very last day that the Sun and Venus are going to be in Libra, and then we're kicking off next week with all of that moving into Scorpio. We do have a trine with Mars, as you will feel this trine with Mars actually taking place, because it is so close to moving into your sign, and that trine will probably continue with at least within the first few days of next week. A trine is planets working together for a common cause. And Mars focus is very much on your day-to-day schedule, while the Sun and Venus are focused on your career goals. So in terms of career goals, your daily schedule obviously has a lot to do with that. I mean, you need to put ample time into that schedule to put towards those goals. It's really important. If you don't do anything to achieve your goals, nothing ever gets done, right? And that just doesn't really work for anybody, right? So that's actually a very helpful aspect. There is a bit of a square with the Sun and Venus are having with Pluto, and Pluto's focus is very much on self. When you're talking about focusing all your energy on your career, it makes it very difficult to focus on the rest of your needs. And or a lot of people just put so much focus in that direction, they're not putting focus on any other part of their lives. They're just focusing all that energy on their career goals and kind of sort of ignoring yourself. And self is really important. You have to be able to focus that energy on yourself and self-care, because if you don't, how do you have the energy to keep going towards your goals? It's sort of a weird thing that we human beings do that's actually very self-destructive and destructive towards those goals as well. Most of the focus for Scorpio is on your support system, and it kind of feels, most of the Scorpios that I know, they have a very small support system. And a lot of that has to do with trust issues. Scorpios have massive trust issues. Almost every Scorpio that I've ever had is like, I don't trust anybody, kind of a thing, or very, very, very few people, actually. With that being said, that can be really difficult when you are overwhelmed and you're searching for somebody to be there for you and you just can't find them because you've kept your circle so small. You want to look at it, of course, manage the way that you're looking at it. If you're looking at it as in I don't have a support system, you're never going to see them. You broaden that looking at it out just a little bit, you will see that actually, even though you don't feel like you have a support system, you do have those people there that are supportive when you need them. You just have to be big enough to reach out to them. And that's okay. Reaching out for support does not make you a weak human being. Although a lot of us tend to think that way, which I don't know why, we just do. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we are moving on to Sagittarius. Sagittarius very much focused on the inner self this week. Not pretty, not pleasant, not fun. Okay. And that is really what it's all about for Sagittarius, right? Is it fun? Great. Is it not? Don't want to do it. Almost every Sagittarian is the same, unfortunately, because you're human, just like the rest of us. You have to deal with it, right? I mean, I have to deal with it, so you guys got to deal with it too. That's kind of how I look at that. When you're focused on the inner self, a lot of things will come up that tend to trigger stuff that is taken place in the past that you're still holding on to, old pain that you're holding on to. When you're holding on to old pain, it is like a bomb that is just tick, 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 ticking, and it may go off at any moment. And it usually doesn't feel very good, to be honest with you. This kind of energy brings up triggers that trigger those things that you're holding on to. And while a lot of us think if we just kind of sort of keep it inside there and just and hide it, it'll go away, and that doesn't work. Obviously, we have to be active in cleaning out that closet. We refer to this house as the secret closet. This is the place where we keep all those things that we don't want other people to see. These are feelings that we don't necessarily share with everybody. And so when we don't clean out that closet, that stuff just sits in there and it festers and it burns and it starts to affect you physically, and all of these different things just start happening there. Things that are not necessarily physically good for you. When you take the time to clean out that closet, and if you imagine it as any other closet that you just stuff stuff in, right? Eventually, you put so much crap in there that it all starts falling out. When you put too much stuff in your emotional closet, it all falling out is you erupting in an emotional experience because you just have to get it out. I mean, you can't keep it in there. So basically, would you rather take the time to go through the closet on your terms, on your time, in your control? Or do you want everything spilling out willy-nilly when you're not ready for it? That's what it comes down to for you guys. No, nobody wants to do it, but I'd at least rather do it and get it over with by myself than all of a sudden have it happen in public when I can't control it. And that's really what it comes down to. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're going to move on to Capricorn. Focus is on you this week with a little bit of an element of that secret closet there, which in my view is that place where we keep all of our emotional stuff, the stuff that we don't necessarily want to share with other people. Capricorns, man, nobody can dig a hole deep enough for that stuff like Capricorns do. I mean, really. But as much of a hole as deep as you dig it, it is going to come up eventually. Trust me, I have seen it. And it is better to allow that to come out, to clean that out on your terms and in your time than it just coming out when you're not expecting it. So keep that in mind if those things are starting to come up, or you start to get triggers from old pain coming up. Take the time to understand the trigger and to work through the problem and to let some of that pain go. It is worth it, and it does make a huge difference. Pluto's focus is on self in terms of self-care. And while cleaning out this closet is a big part of self-care, I am also very much a fan of spoiling yourself. And if you're going to clean out that closet, that is a prime opportunity of spoiling yourself. I don't think that Capricorns are really good at spoiling themselves, to be honest. Well, that's not 100% true. Okay. I've seen some Capricorns that spoil themselves rotten, and I've seen some that sacrifice themselves for everybody else. It really just depends on the individual, I guess. But self-care is important, and taking care of yourself, giving to yourself what you would give to other people is really important this week as well. With Pluto's influence, and Pluto is no longer retrograde, it is all forward movement from here on out. And its movement is officially leaving your sign as we get towards the end of the year and into the beginning of the year. We're going to start to see Pluto start to move into Aquarius. But because it's such a slow moving planet, it's going to bump back and forth between the signs, probably for a few years, in all honesty. But it will be nice. I have seen Pluto in Capricorn since I started doing horoscopes over 10 years ago. So it will be nice for you guys. For me as an Aquarius, I don't know, but I'm gonna worry about that later, to be honest with you. Your source of power, Pluto is saying that your source of power is in how you take care of you. And a lot of times people will think that self-care is selfish, especially if you're a mother. But I'm not saying to put yourself above your children either. That's not quite in the direction that we're going in. But the direction that I'm really going in is by taking care of yourself. You're teaching others how to take care of themselves too. You're teaching others how to take care of you. And that's a really important lesson to teach other people. And they're not going to learn it by you telling them. They're going to learn it by you showing them. And that's really important. They're also going to learn from you how to self-care themselves. And that's really important, especially if we are talking mothers with children. Children, it's like monkey see, monkey do. They do everything that you do. And you want to make sure that they are doing what's best for them above everybody else. You don't want to teach them to basically be a doormat to everybody else. Not that you are being a doormat, but we all have those doormat tendencies from time to time. So that's what I have for you guys this week. I am going to move on to Aquarius. Aquarius is very much focused on the past this week. And Saturn's a beautiful lineup in a grand trine with Mercury and Mars is very helpful in terms of learning those lessons from the past. Like we really want to learn any more lessons, right? Well, guess what? It is a lifelong thing. You never get a break. It just keeps on happening. And it is what it is. Yay. Mindset's important, of course, but we all have those days where it's like, can I just have a day off? Wouldn't that be really nice? Mercury's focus is on career. Mars' focus is on your day-to-day schedule. When we're talking about career goals and the past, we're really talking about taking responsibility for the mistakes that you have made in the past in terms of your career goals so you can avoid making those same mistakes in your career goals from here on out. Perfect example for you. I'm an Aquarius. I have some career goals. My laziness really does get in the way of those career goals. And I'm going to call it what it is. It is laziness. And in the past, I have had a lot of, yeah, that seems like a lot of work, so I'm not going to do it moments, in all honesty. Now, my goals from here on out are a little bit more in depth, and that kind of energy and that kind of mindset is not going to be helpful to me from here on out. So I want to take the time to look to the past to see where that was a problem, and I want to eliminate that as a problem. It makes things a whole heck of a lot easier to move forward, right? Saturn is still squared with Uranus, and Uranus's focus is on those you love. This is interesting to me in the example that I just used, because I tended to use those that I loved as an excuse a lot for my laziness. It wasn't because I was lazy. It was because I had to take care of my children. It's because I had to clean my house. It's because my husband was coming home early, you know. I think that in all honesty, not to say that using your family members as an excuse, I mean, a lot of times, yes, you have responsibilities to them and you can't do everything, right? But we do want to avoid using them as an excuse for sure. We do want to make sure that we create ample time for everything, and then therefore we're not necessarily um, ignoring one thing for another thing, if that makes sense, because that nothing ever gets done. Trust me, I'm not where I wanted to be 10 years ago because I didn't put in the work, period. This is what this is all about. It gives me an opportunity to really take a look at that and say, okay, well, obviously that didn't work. So let's come up with a different plan and see how that works. And we'll try and omit the laziness in that. So that's what I have for you guys. It's a little bit of a slap in the face for me, to be honest with you. And it could be a little bit of a slap in the face to other Aquarians as well. But we need that slap in the face every now and then. And I think for the sign of Aquarius, sometimes it has to be a pretty hard slap to get our attention, or at least to get our heads out of the clouds, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you guys. And finally, we got to Pisces, and we've got Neptune in retrograde in Pisces, very much focused on the mind and how you think about things. Now, how you approach these certain things mentally determines whether you are successful or not. That is just in black and white. That is the way that it is. And at the very end of the week, when the moon moves into an opposition with Neptune, very much focused on long-term goals, also joins in a square with Mars, and this becomes a T-square. It becomes a pretty big challenge. Now, we just have the square with Mars for most of the week, pretty much, and Jupiter is kind of a part of that square as well, because Neptune and Jupiter are, even though they're in two different signs, they're very close to each other. So it still is a pretty wide conjunction, but it is still a conjunction between the two, both of which are retrograde, of course. This really does create a bit of a challenge. Mars has a very aggressive energy. And when we're talking about your day-to-day schedule, how you approach your schedule mentally does really make or break everything. If you look at it and go, oh my God, I got so much to do today, I'm never going to get through it. It's really going to put a lot of frustrating energy into it. It's going to feel like you're dragging your way through that day. If you approach the schedule with, oh my God, look at all this stuff that's going to keep me busy all day, and you're excited about it, it's a completely different type of energy. You're not dragging your way through it. You're gliding your way through it. It does make a huge difference. And when you're talking about changes in your schedule, that makes a big, huge difference too. If you get frustrated over the changes, you're going to put frustrated energy into everything for the rest of the day. That's not necessarily going to be helpful to you in the long run. So it does create a bit of a challenge. It does bring some emotion in there. It brings some frustration in there. But you get to manage that emotion and frustration. And the more you manage it, the easier it is going to be to get through it for sure. We also do have a sextile with Pluto, which is continuing, as well as a sextile with Uranus. Now, these are aspects that are really helpful towards getting you through that challenge, especially in terms of the sextile with Pluto. Pluto is direct now. Pluto is all about your source of personal power and transformation. Your power is in your reaction. It's in how you handle your reaction. The minute you start to handle you start to allow your frustrations to speak for you, you're not handling your frustration, and you're giving away your power with both hands like confetti that you're just throwing away. Why would you do that? Why would you give away your power? Think about that. And the sextile with Uranus is also very helpful. Uranus's focus is on those you love. And guess who your support system is? It's those people that are closest to you in your family. Granted, they frustrate the hell out of us too, but they are our biggest support system. Leaning on them when you need to does help you get through it an awful lot. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And that's what I have for everybody. Thank you for coming and hanging out with me. I'm Melissa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Psychic. And I hope you guys have a great week. I will see you next week.